Welcome to BioStock Investor Pitch. Today we will look at Oncoinvent, a company developing treatments for metastatic cancers in body cavities. Here to present the company is CEO Anders Månsson. Welcome and go right ahead.
Thank you so much. Right, so my name is Anders Månsson. I'm the CEO of Oncoinvent, and it's my pleasure here today to give you a corporate presentation explaining why Oncoinvent might be a good investment opportunity. So what does the company do? Well, in one sentence, we're developing a new standard therapy for peritoneal carcinomatosis with local receptor-independent radiopharmaceutical technology. So let's go right ahead and look at the pillars of the investment opportunity. So first of all, radiopharmaceuticals is quite the hotspot these days, with a lot of companies being acquired and lots of investments in this space. We have very experienced leadership in this company. The company is founded by the same founders who founded Algeta that brought Xofigo to market some 10 years ago. And lots of people, key personnel in our company, have experience from that development as well. So they're not doing this for the first time. The area that we're focusing on initially, clinically, is peritoneal carcinomatosis, and that, as I will explain to you later on in the presentation, is certainly an area with a very high unmet medical need and significant patient numbers. We have in our lead product candidate, Radspherin, a pipeline in a product. The product is receptor independent, which means that we can treat cancers of various types, which means that there are significant patient numbers in this area. And we do have the potential, we suggest, to make this product standard of care in the area of peritoneal carcinomatosis. So those are the pillars. So let's move on to the presentation, starting with why Radiopharma is a hotspot these days. So this picture essentially depicts a few capital raising that has been going on in the last 6 months or so, starting with Convergent announcing a $90 million raise, proceeding with Mariana raising $175 million, and RayzeBio, as I think most of the viewers will be aware, had a very conspicuous IPO in September, raising the value of the company to $1.4 billion. Also, in a way, our sibling company, which has the same scientific founders, ArtBio, had a raise of $90 million in December. And I would also like to highlight that in December there was a review article published on the pharmaceutical or radiopharmaceutical market space depicting a progression or prognosis of the market size to exceed $13 billion by 2032. So I recommend that article for people interested in this area. Also, as I alluded to before, there's been a few conspicuous acquisitions in this area. We saw in October that Eli Lilly jumped into this area with a $1.4 billion acquisition of Point Biopharma. And there was no rest between Christmas and New Year's because we saw the announcement that Bristol Myers Squibb committed to an acquisition of RayzeBio, which IPO'd only a few months ago, with a very conspicuous valuation of $4.1 billion. So this is certainly a hotspot in biopharmaceuticals these days. So switching now from the market to the company, we have a few pillars that I would like to highlight, which are the merits of this company. As I already alluded to, we have significant experience in this area, and we have significant radiochemistry and preclinical expertise. Again, the founders behind the company are the same founders that brought Xofigo to market some 10 years ago. I will certainly develop very much more the lead product candidate that we have got going, but it is a very innovative alpha particle product, and we'll explain in greater detail how it works in the presentation going forward. I will also highlight that we have very encouraging clinical data and exciting upcoming milestones for this lead product candidate. And of course, very importantly in this area, we control our own manufacturing and quality control and our supply chain. This includes also the supply chain of the raw material that goes into this. This is thorium-228, and we ourselves produce the active ingredient radium-224. I would also like to highlight the leadership team here. This is a part of the leadership. My name is Månsson, as I said. I'm the CEO. My experience is both from biotech, from the finance industry, but also largely from large multinational pharmaceutical companies where I've headed up global business development, mergers and acquisitions and licensing in the past, apart from several other types of leadership positions. We have a solid Chief Operations Officer in Gro Gjellum. She has experience all the way back to Algeta and was instrumental in developing Xofigo, which made it to market some 10 years ago. We have our Chief Medical Officer, Karin Myhren, who has experience both in radiotherapeutics and also in radiodiagnostics. And we have a solid CFO in Tore Kvam, who has experience from biotech and also from the finance industry. So let's focus in on the therapeutic area in question or in focus here. It's peritoneal carcinomatosis, and that is a syndrome of cancer in the peritoneum that can originate from various tracts. So first of all, it can be primary, but it's most often secondary cancer, i.e. metastases, and these metastases can emanate from organs outside of the peritoneum, but more commonly from organs inside the peritoneum. Typically, these are organs in the gastrointestinal tract and the reproductive tract. As you can see in this slide, there are plenty of different cancer indications that seed metastases in the peritoneum. But we've chosen to focus initial clinical efforts on two of these, one from the gastrointestinal tract, that's colorectal cancer, and one from the reproductive tract, and that is ovarian cancer. And the percentages that you can see at the right of the screen would be the likelihood that the patient has peritoneal metastases already at diagnosis. As you can see, that's quite common both in colorectal cancer and ovarian cancer, and in ovarian cancer it's actually very common indeed. And I will demonstrate to you that given the fact that there are so many different cancer types that can seed metastases in the peritoneum, there are considerable patient numbers, and there is certainly a very high unmet medical need, as I will demonstrate in the next slide. So looking at this slide, looking to the graph to the left, you will see the long-term survival rates of patients with colorectal cancer and peritoneal metastases. As you can see, the 3-year survival is 36%, and the 5-year survival is just above 20%, so a very poor prognosis with the current standard of care. If you look at the graph on the right side, you see the 5-year survival rates in ovarian cancer depending on stage. And as you can see, stage 3 and 4 have percentages of just below 40% and just below 20% respectively. So also here, a very poor prognosis with the current standard of care. Now, the two graphs represent the two cancer indications that we have initiated clinical trials in, but our next objective in terms of clinical trials might be gastric carcinoma, because in that cancer there is an even greater unmet medical need. As you can see here, there's very poor prognosis, very poor survival rates, and indeed at 5 years there's no survival at all. So let's focus in on the product, which we call Radspherin. So Radspherin is a radiopharmaceutical which is comprised of more than 1 billion microparticles that we insert into the peritoneum after cytoreductive surgery. So this point is very important. It is not meant to replace cytoreductive surgery, but rather to complement it. So standard therapy in this area is for the surgeon to open up the peritoneum and to remove all the visible metastases. But as we all know, such surgery often leaves behind a plethora of micrometastases that the surgeon could not see and therefore could not remove. And this is where our treatment comes in. It's an adjuvant treatment to the surgery, complementing the surgery by eradicating the micrometastases that the surgeon could not see and therefore could not remove. There's more than 1 billion of these particles in a single dose of Radspherin. That ensures that there is an even homogeneous distribution throughout the peritoneum, but the particles are of a size that makes it impossible for them to escape the body cavity that is the peritoneum. And that is really important because that means that there is no systemic exposure to the radiation that the product brings, but it stays inside the peritoneum. And as you will see from the next slide, The objective of this treatment is to radiate the entire inner lining of the peritoneum, giving the inner lining of the peritoneum a close shave, for lack of better words. There is no specific cell type targeting here, so it will shave off also healthy cells and micrometastases inside the peritoneum. However, as this is alpha radiation based, there is a very short range in tissue, so the radiation doesn't reach beyond 0.1 millimeter. So there is very little depth in the actual radiation. No other organs are affected by this, and also deeper lying tissue beyond a few cell layers are unaffected by the radiation. But the micrometastases, which are shallow in their routing in the peritoneum, will be affected by the radiation, and I'll show you the efficacy numbers later on. So let's move to clinical development and the results of that so far. So we have conducted 2 studies, phase 1/2A studies. It's both, as I alluded to, in ovarian cancer and in colorectal carcinoma. And as you will see from the screen, we have a few sites that have participated in these trials. Moving directly to the actual results, let's look at safety first. We have a very robust safety profile here. The product is extremely well tolerated, and there is essentially no organ toxicity. As you will note from the first point, we only saw grade 1 to 2 events reported as possibly related to Radspherin, and in this context that is virtually nothing. We also have a single dosing concept. You can, of course, repeat the dose at a later date should it be necessary. But, of course, as I'll show you later on, the efficacy results indicate that that is not going to be necessary in many cases. But that's good to know. Biodistribution is, of course, measured. And as I said, the alpha radiation nature of this product means that there is no reach to deeper lying tissue and to other organs. We've measured and concluded that 80% of the radioactivity remains in the peritoneal cavity, and the absorbed doses in other organs are way, way, way below doses associated with any kind of toxicity. And also, since this is alpha radiation, and because of the reach of that being very short, this is very uncumbersome for healthcare personnel. Alpha radiation is generally stopped by a single sheet of paper. It's therefore stopped by the walls of the glass vial and the plastic in the tubes, so there is no risk of exposure to healthcare personnel. There are very low amounts of activity in blood and urine, so these products or waste products can be treated as normal. There's no special precautions required whatsoever. Okay, so let's move on to the efficacy now that we have concluded the safety of the drug. And let's compare this. This is now the colorectal cancer study, and we compare this to a historic group which have received the standard treatment of cytoreductive surgery in combination with something called HIPEC, which is high temperature chemotherapy. We know from historic data, which is abundant, that there is a 50% of the patients are expected to have a recurrence within 12 months with a standard treatment. So we published earlier last year in the summertime 15-month data showing that the amount of patients having a recurrence was at 25% after 15 months, and notably we didn't have a single recurrence in the peritoneum for this group, which is very, very relevant. And also later in the autumn we published data showing that at 18 months, which is the full follow-up in this study, we had 33% total recurrences, but notably not a single recurrence in the peritoneum, which is the organ that we're treating. So the cause behind the other recurrences would be that the patient would already have distant metastases that were undiagnosed at the treatment point. So if you're like me and prefer to view things more visually, I provide also these slides. So essentially the first graph shows that there is not a single recurrence locally in the peritoneum, and the graph to the right is perhaps more interesting as it shows the Kaplan-Meier curve with extrapolation from this data, and currently we're trending at a median progression-free survival of 30 months, which is a significant approval over the 12 months that we know that historic treatment groups have experienced. So we have a target of improving progression-free survival of 12 months, but currently we are trending towards 18 months. Just a slide on the production and manufacturing of Radspherin. So we have a reliable supply of starting material, which in our case is thorium-228, which can be sourced from a variety of sources. And we do have our in-house production of radium-224, which is the isotope, which is the effective, or rather the active ingredient, so to speak. Radium-224 has a half-life of 3.5 days, which is why it's essential to have a reliable supply chain. We have internal expertise in both development, manufacturing and quality control of radiopharmaceuticals, as I already alluded to, and we have an in-house facility with state-of-the-art GMP production of Radspherin. However, we intend to outsource production to several sites, given the short half-life and therefore relatively short shelf life of about 8 days that this product will have. So we intend to do outsourcing to a second site in Europe during the course of 2024, and at least in 2025 we will have a site in the US up and running. This might not be necessary for the phase 2b studies, but it will be necessary for phase 3 and commercialization. And yes, as we describe at the bottom of the slide here, we have so far treated over 60 patients on time, every time. This is a rather busy slide, but it is an important slide, so I'll take you through it in some detail. So currently we're in the very start of 2024, and what we have done now is that we have recruited the final patients in the phase 1/2a studies for colorectal cancer and ovarian cancer. That recruitment was concluded in November, and what remains now is the follow-up period. The follow-up period is defined in these studies as 18 months for the colorectal cancer study, as we saw when we reviewed the efficacy results, and for ovarian cancer it's 24 months. So that means that by the end of 2025 we will have the full long-term follow-up data from these phase 1/2a studies. In the spring of 2024, we intend to start phase 2b studies. These are randomized control studies. We envision recruiting 60 actively treated patients and 30 patients in the control group for both studies. And we already have IND clearance for this, so we can start the studies also in the US. The study will be conducted in the US and in Europe. And we anticipate to have an approval for Europe at the end of Q1 of this year, 2024. So the studies will be initiated in the second quarter. And that means that we will be able to recruit all these patients in both of the phase 2b studies before the end of 2025. So at that point in time, at the end of 2025, we will have the full results of the phase 1/2a studies, and we will have treated all the patients in the phase 2b studies. And what is left then is the follow-up period after the phase 2b studies. At that point in time, in order to progress to phase 3, which we think that we can do right away, we will probably turn the colorectal cancer study, which is 2b, to a phase 2b/3 study, so it will proceed seamlessly, given a dialogue that we will have with regulatory bodies. However, in order to start the phase 3 part of the study, we will need to refinance or to make an exit. And the latter, I think, is the most probable scenario, because given what I've just told you on the efficacy and given what I've told you on the lack of other workable treatments, it is a very probable scenario that we will have a conditional approval during the course of phase 3. And it would be a shame if we didn't have commercial infrastructure up and running during the course of phase 3, because you never know when that conditional approval might occur. So our aim now is to take development onwards through phase 2b. At the same time, we will scale up the productions, ensuring that it is scalable enough to meet commercial requirements eventually, and to take the company to the end of 2025, a bit into 2026, and by that point make an industry exit. That is our goal. And in order to do that, we need $50 million, which we aim to source during the course of 2024. And the proceeds will be used predominantly, again, in conducting the phase 2b trials and in scaling up production, so it's ready to go for commercialization. So what are the possible candidates for doing an exit deal here? Well, there are several big pharma companies that are present in oncology, and not only in oncology, but in our key indications here, colorectal cancer and ovarian cancer. Those are the companies on the left. We see a few companies that are in radiopharmaceuticals, but not in the targeted indications. And in the middle, there's the sweet spot of companies that are both present in radiopharmaceuticals and in the targeted indications of colorectal cancer and or ovarian cancer. And that is obviously the sweet spot, but as you can see, there are also plenty of big pharma companies with a large stake in oncology that has not yet made the move into radiopharmaceuticals. But I would like to highlight that Lilly just made the move, as I alluded to before, and I would like to highlight with an exclamation point that Bristol Myers Squibb has taken a further step into this area through the acquisition of RayzeBio. So, with that, I would just like to again summarize the key messages as to why an investment in Oncoinvent might be a good idea. Again, I've demonstrated to you that radiopharmaceuticals is quite the hotspot these days, with large investments and also acquisition activity in just the last few months. We do have a very experienced leadership and founding fathers in this company, and the founding fathers behind Oncoinvent were also the key scientific founders behind the development of Xofigo that made it to market 10 years ago, and also the scientific founders of ArtBio, which just had an interesting and conspicuous capital raise as well. We do have an area of unmet medical need in peritoneal carcinomatosis, and because our product is receptor independent, we can treat cancers of various types in this organ. So that is also the reason we suggest that our treatment could become standard of care for peritoneal carcinomatosis. With that, I would like to thank you for your attention, and I would welcome any sort of questions that you might have. I highlight an email address that you can use on this screen, but apart from that, thank you so much for listening.
Currently, these types of cancers are treated with a combination of surgery and chemo, resulting in a very poor survival rate after 5 years. Most patients doesn't make it. How can you improve that in terms of, do you buy them more time or do you get to live?
Yeah, we'll see what the final results will become at the end, but currently we're trending, as I alluded to in the presentation, of increasing progression-free survival by 18 months. And that will surely translate into an increased survival as well. And that might actually be more than 18 months, because the peritoneal metastases per se are the most difficult kinds of metastases to treat. So the life-limiting impact of having peritoneal metastases might be very much more considerable than metastases elsewhere in the body. And also, if you have metastases elsewhere in the body, they're probably reachable for other kinds of therapy as well, whereas the peritoneal metastases are the most troublesome. So focusing a treatment on the peritoneal metastases, I think, will generate better survival outcomes for these patients.
Yeah. And I mean, talking about that, what makes these types of cancers so hard to treat?
Well, first of all, it's very different types of cancer. So if you have a cancer type specific treatment, you will not be able to treat all of peritoneal metastases. You will be able to treat perhaps one. Also, these metastases are difficult to reach if you want to apply a systemic treatment. First of all, if you were to apply a systemic treatment, you have lots of collateral tissue damage in the body. The entire body is affected by a systemic treatment, which is why we prefer a local approach here. Then there's the issue that these micrometastases might not be optimally vasculated. So that means that perhaps a systemic treatment that acts through the bloodstream might not be able to reach them. Some of these micrometastases might actually be floating in the peritoneal liquid, and then, of course, the systemic treatment cannot reach them. So that is at least a few items of explanation as to why this is so difficult to treat.
Yeah, and as you said, the help is very dire. And since there is such a need for better treatment, what does your competition look like?
Yeah, we have zero competition in terms of having something that is remotely resembling our treatment. We apply a radiopharmaceutical treatment, so and this is based on alpha emission, and there are other, currently Xofigo is the only alpha emitter on the market, but there are other alpha emitting radiopharmaceuticals in development. However, not using our concept of local rather than systemic treatment. So I think the elegance of our treatment is, in fact, that we don't have to shoot radioactive material through the bloodstream, but we can target the organ that needs the treatment the most. And there's nobody else doing this clinically, we know that for sure. If somebody does something similar preclinical, it's impossible to know, but we haven't seen any competition so far.
Speaking about that, could you use this for other cancer treatments as well, or other kinds of cancers?
Yes. I mean, currently we're doing clinical development in colorectal cancer and ovarian cancer, but as I also alluded to in the presentation, there are so many different cancer types that seed metastasis into the peritoneum. And given the fact that our treatment is receptor independent, we can essentially treat them all. So we have that's why I also coined the phrase that we have a pipeline in a product. We can go indication by indication or cancer type by cancer type. It's still peritoneal carcinomatosis, right? But then you could potentially use the same technology also to treat other body cavities. And we have been thinking about the pleura, the membrane around the lungs, which is also very prone to metastases. And we have also considered bladder cancer, which would be also a body cavity treatment through installation. But in that case, it would be primary cancer rather than metastatic cancer.
I'm sorry, than secondary. So the next big step for you is, of course, the 2B studies. How certain are you that you will find the capital to go ahead? We talk about this humble sum of $50 million.
Yeah, $50 million is perhaps a large sum of money in the sort of Swedish or Norwegian or Scandinavian context. But as I also alluded to in the presentation, it's not a large sum of money in comparison to what the other radiopharmaceutical companies have been able to raise. It's actually quite modest in comparison to specifically the US-based companies. So we are very optimistic that we will be able to source this money.
Mm. If I were an investor, what would make me hesitant to invest in you?
Well, of course, it's a new technology, and if we didn't have the intermediate analysis that we now have in terms of clinical efficacy and safety, there would be uncertainty in this. Now, we have, of course, I certainly grant that we have only got intermediate results, but there is a very, very, very strong efficacy signal. I mean, we were surprised to see that we didn't have a single local recurrence in the patients that we have analysed so far. So that speaks to the potential efficacy of this. Now, of course, when we get to larger patient materials, larger studies, we don't anticipate to have zero recurrences. That is an ideal that is impossible to attain when you look at large patient material. But we are confident that the efficacy signal is very strong, and we are very confident that the safety aspects of this product are perfectly fine. There is always risk in development, but that's general to every biotech company. If you look at IQVIA benchmarks, I think the development success probability in phase 2 is about 50% or even lower than 50%. So obviously there's development risk, but given the very strong efficacy signal that we have already obtained, I wouldn't spend my time worrying so much, actually.
Okay, so you have given us so many arguments for investing, but if you had to choose one, what is the strongest one?
Yeah, again, I think I'll repeat the efficacy signal that we already have, and also the fact that radiopharmaceuticals in general seems to be, heading towards inroads, massive inroads in the oncology space. There's a huge investment interest in this area.
Thank you so much for joining us here, Anders Månsson, CEO Oncoinvent.
Thank you so much.